The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. How important can it be for medical practitioners, doctors, and nurses to discover and fix a gap of care in the treatment of patients? In many cases, it can be a matter of life and death. For example, before hand washing between procedures became standard practice, many patients died from transferred infections. It was only when medical staff came to understand that their own dirty hands could be the source of the problem, could carry bacteria invisible to the naked eye, spreading disease from patient to patient, that the use of soap and sanitizer began to save millions of lives. In the same way, there can be psychological gaps in medical practice that can harm patients too. Here's an unlikely example. Say an agnostic doctor told a faithful Christian patient about to undergo surgery that praying to Jesus was futile, useless, and a waste of time. It would be an act of psychological malpractice that could frighten and stress the patient and should at least earn the doctor a reprimand. As I said, such a situation seems highly unlikely. Yet today there is an equivalent practice just as cruel and potentially as harmful, and that is the failure of doctors and nurses to acknowledge, listen to, and respect patient reports of near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. As a hospital chaplain for 15 years, I lost count of the hundreds of times I had to apologize to patients for the way they were treated when telling some staff person about what they saw during an NDE, when their heart stopped or their failing body opened a door in some way to an experience of the other side. They'd start telling their doctor or nurse about what they saw when their soul left their body, only to be put down with remarks like, "Oh, you were dreaming, you were hallucinating." It was the effects of the anesthesia. It was the dying of the optic nerve, the release of brain chemicals, etc., etc. Anything but acknowledge and respect that the patient had experienced what to them was a miracle, a personal, mystical enlightenment, a gift from God, and therefore a reason to live. The NDE experience, which patients often describe as more real than real, is as important psychologically and can be as healing as that stent that got inserted or that tumor just removed. Conversely, ridiculing that patient's vision can be as harmful as a doctor not washing his hands before operating. Many listeners out there have heard similar stories of such a medical gap in care, and so should be excited by news brought by our two guests today, Lilia Samoilo and Heidi Walsh. In brief, the news is that as prestigious an institution as John Hopkins is initiating a source that can be permanently available to medical staff for educating themselves on how to fill this gap concerning the NDE experience. So let me introduce our guests. Lilia Samoilo, a return guest to the show, is a near-death experiencer who has been a mental health and spiritual counselor for over 35 years. As a minister and an international veteran NDE educator, she coined the phrase, closing the medical and spiritual gap of care for NDE patients, and spent years raising awareness about NDEs worldwide to medical professionals and clergy. Lilia is an associate of Dr. Diane Corcoran's Vet NDE project, and both of them were invited by Heidi Walsh to be co-commentary authors for the NIB NDE Symposium published by MUSE by John Hopkins University Press in the May 2020 issue. Heidi Walsh, our other guest, is the managing editor for Narrative Inquiry in Bioethics, a Journal of Qualitative Research, NIB. NIB is published on behalf of the NIB Foundation, a nonprofit charitable organization committed to fostering education and research in bioethics. The journal publishes personal stories that describe complex human experiences, and Volume 10, Number 1, is titled Healthcare After a Near-Death Experience. In addition, Heidi is a senior project manager in the Bioethics Research Center at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, and has worked in clinical settings with emergency and behavioral health patients in the past, sparking her passion for finding ways to improve the patient experience. Heidi has a master's degree in public health and is a certified health education specialist. So, Lilia and Heidi, welcome to NDE Radio.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you so much.
Lilia, let me begin with you. You've worked for about a year with Heidi in putting this project together. So how did you happen to get involved?
Well, it came by a simple request from Dr. Diane Corcoran. Lilia, I received this from the Narrative Inquiry in Bioethics. They're looking for someone to help them find NDE subjects for their NDE Symposium. Please contact them, and will you take care of this? So that's how it began. And it's been an outstanding relationship between myself and the near-death experiencers who contributed, along with the NIB staff, especially Heidi Walsh. It's just been a magnificent experience, and I'm so proud to be part of it.
Now, Lilia, you got 12 of the 18 NDE stories together, as I understand it, that are there to help teach medical practitioners what NDEs are all about. Were the experiencers you talked to happy about sharing their stories?
They were thrilled because they knew that the outcome would be educating medical professionals and possibly clergy or even the general public that near-death experiences are real to them as experiencers. And they were hoping that this symposium would teach them that the medical doctors, by not listening to their self-reports, actually created the term I coined, which is the gap of care.
Mm.
So I helped not only... Oh, excuse me.
No, I was just going to go on and ask Heidi, what inspired her to do a symposium on NDEs?
Yeah, so in December of 2018, the NIB co-editor-in-chief, Dr. James Dubois, approached the editors and I with the idea of doing a symposium on near-death experiences. Dr. Dubois had recently read an article by John Hagen III in the Journal of Clinical Oncology called The Near-Death Experience, Diagnosis and Treatment of a Common Medical Syndrome. The article detailed how approximately 20% of patients who require resuscitation report having an NDE. However, healthcare providers largely receive no training on how to respond or support these patients. And I have to tell you that even with those compelling statistics, I at first was not convinced that NDEs were a topic that NIB should cover. I feared that our readers, who are primarily academics who are interested in bioethics, would question why we were covering a topic that maybe isn't as understood or accepted in the medical world. NIB has a reputation as a distinguished and trustworthy academic publication, and I didn't yet understand the bioethical issues involved with NDEs, which you've just gone over with the gap of care. But Dr. Dubois really pushed for us to cover this topic, and we ended up putting out a call for stories. It was very slow to start, but then I got that call from Lilia, who offered her help, and that's when really the issue took off, and we ended up collecting 18 total first-person stories from people who had experienced an NDE.
Yeah, you couldn't have had a better helper than Lilia.
Right.
I know that for a fact. Did you have any resistance from others at Johns Hopkins or at the NIB Foundation?
Well, I don't think I was alone in my hesitation, but Jim really was persistent and insisted that we do the issue, and so we did, and I think all of us are really pleased with the outcome.
Mm. Now, I have to ask you personally, did this work you did on this project change you and your ideas about life and death for yourself in any way?
So I worked with the NDE authors for over a year at least, and their stories were so interesting to me, and I just love hearing everyone's stories in general, so this job is really a great fit for me. But it wasn't until I was editing the final proofs and I first read the symposium from cover to cover that I said, wow, we have done a great job at demonstrating that it doesn't matter what the scientific truth is behind what causes NDEs, and it doesn't matter what my spiritual beliefs are. I can listen without judgment, and the medical community can listen. And at a minimum, we can validate and support patients when they tell us that they've experienced what turns out to be an NDE. Because anytime a patient is not being supported, that needs to be confronted.
Mm. As a chaplain, I found that not only experiencers, but those people who had not had an NDE, for example, but had heard a story, were often moved by those stories and given hope from the notion that yes, there is a loving God on the other side, and that we just don't end when our bodies die. I was wondering if you'd gotten any feedback since the May issue from any doctors or nurses or others who were affected positively or negatively by this project.
We've gotten some interest in it, and I think that we're all working from home currently, so it's hard. I haven't run into colleagues like I normally would, but there's no doubt that the people who read these stories and read the symposium will take away that discounting a patient's report of a near-death experience or even encouraging patients to not talk about their NDEs can really affect their well-being and impact their long-term physical and mental health, along with relationships with loved ones. A lot of the authors mention, they were really hurt when loved ones didn't believe them and when healthcare providers dismissed them. So it turns out that it's definitely a bioethical issue, and healthcare workers aren't provided education typically about this, and these aren't uncommon experiences for people. No,
there are estimated 700 plus, maybe as many as 770, according to one Gallup poll taken several years ago, per day. Wow. in this country alone. So worldwide, they're extremely common.
Yeah.
And yet, up until recently, when books have been written and movies made on the subject, an awful lot of people thought it was, the work of the devil or a total hallucination. Do you have some of the titles of some of the articles right there?
Yeah.
Tell the audience what sorts of topics got covered in these 18. You don't have to read them all, but just to give them a broad sampling of the articles available.
One of the very first proposals that I received was from Stephanie Arnold. Her story, Intuition Told Me I Would Die. No one believed me. No one believed it would save my life. I love her story. It's an amazing account of how she thought that she would die. She had a premonition about it and tried to tell everyone that she could, and no one believed her until finally a surgeon listened, and it ended up saving her life. The Place in Between, The Other Side of Heaven by Peter Anthony. I think he's been on your program. A Physician's Near-Death Experience. These are all just fabulous. Childhood NDE, Life Experiences Shown for the Next 50 Years. I was really glad that we could have Bill McDonald contribute his story.
Yes.
And one amazing thing that happened when I was collecting stories was I was telling my husband's aunt about the symposium, and she said to me, "Oh, I've had an experience like that." I had no idea she had experienced a near-death experience before. And so she wrote a story for the symposium. Her story is entitled, Do Angels Really Exist? Jeannie Barbin is her name.
Mm. This is this gives, I think, the listeners an idea of what you're exposing medical staff to through the journal, and I'm wondering, right now it's a limited readership, it's a closed readership, right, because of the way the structure is set up at Johns Hopkins.
Yes.
So, would you know approximately how many people have read this so far?
I don't have those numbers, but I can tell you that about 1,600 institutions throughout the world have access to NIB through subscription, but NIB is only available to subscribers, which really limits our impact to mainly people who have access through a university.
So those 1,600, say, hospital libraries, for example, or university libraries?
Yes, mainly medical schools.
Medical schools.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you wouldn't have an idea right now as to how many readers would have easy access to it without having to buy the journal?
No, it's limited for sure.
Yeah. Now, with the right funding, it's going to be possible to open this up to everybody, as I understand it. Tell us how that would work.
Yeah, Lilia and I are committed to raising money so that we can make these stories available, open access to the general public in perpetuity in a publication called Voices. And Voices can be accessed for free to everyone, and it can be shared without any restrictions. And like you mentioned earlier, the journal is published by a nonprofit, and all gifts are tax deductible. Our goal is to raise $25,000. That money goes towards paying the press's licensing fee, as well as for our efforts in putting the publication together and creating a discussion guide to pair with the publication. And the discussion guide can be used in ethics education and professional training.
So this is something that might be available to hospital chaplains as well, ultimately.
Yes, chaplains, family members, nurses, whoever would have an interest in this, they could easily find it and access it if we're able to raise the money. And Lilia and I both believe that could go far to closing the gap of care just by increasing awareness about what an appropriate response is when someone reveals to you that they've had this experience.
Yeah, I'm particularly excited about the notion that chaplains might have some authentic medical-based journals that they can turn to, material that they could look at and study. Because, believe it or not, one of the roadblocks I found in dealing with other chaplains on this very subject was that their religion, whether it was usually some mainline church, Catholic or Lutheran or what have you, was fundamentally doubtful about the whole NDE experience, and so it handicapped the chaplains terribly in when it came time for them to sit down and listen to a patient's experience. I would get calls from other chaplains saying, "I just heard this strange story from a patient. Maybe you should talk to them." And so I would go down and I'd hear the story and I'd know immediately what they were talking about, and I could. But all chaplains should be able to do this, even if they don't necessarily accept it as part of their faith. They should definitely have the ability to deal in a rational and kindly and understanding way, an empathetic way, with the person who's had this experience. And I think ultimately they would begin to understand the power and the truth of these experiences as well as a result. So I think this project has got enormous potential in teaching not only medical, but also chaplains, religious staff, and the families that get counseled by the chaplains. You know, if a husband comes and says, "My wife just told me this weird story, chaplain," and it's about some experience she had out of body, watching them try to resuscitate her while she was on the operating table or something like that, the chaplain would know what to say. He'd know what to do. Yeah. He'd know how to explain it. And down the line, this might actually save some of the divorces that have come out of misunderstandings about NDEs in people's lives.
Yes. We actually use the stories at Washington University. I'm also a project manager there to teach ethics sessions with WashU physicians and trainees. And I think our model could also work for chaplains and other professionals who may come across people that have had these experiences, because the training really works to increase the clinician's awareness of the patient experiences. And then we highlight the importance of listening and validating, supporting patients. And we ask the trainees to imagine and discuss how they would react to the situation that's told in the story. So it gives them, the trainees, the tools that prepare them to interact appropriately when they find themselves in these real life similar situations.
And how did that come to be, that program that you're just describing?
So I work in an Bioethics Research Center, and it's something we do. The physicians have to have a certain number of ethics credits, so this counts towards their ethics credit. And they're very popular because we don't just lecture at people, it's a conversation. And people have reported to us leaving with a real sense of understanding. I think they're incredibly effective. Just personal stories in general to understand others' experiences and give some empathy to others.
Sure. And Lilia, this is an area that I know you've worked with vets and with medical people, as has Diane Corcoran, in trying to validate the importance of listening to NDE reports. And it's been, I know, very frustrating because military people are afraid that they'll be considered crazy if they talk about something that happened to them while they were wounded or while they were on the operating table. You want to talk a little about how this might spread through the military, especially the VA?
Well, yes, and they're they're a hard nut to crack. And I think that this NDE Symposium, what it calls the attention to, and especially our article, is that the gap of care is created. This gap is created, and it's 100% preventable. But as far as combat soldiers, the reason why I steered towards that area in the beginning, and I've been doing this with Dr. Corcoran for 7 years, is because the combat soldier wakes up, it's the most profound experience he's ever had, and he's if he discusses it, they throw him into the psych ward and give him drugs, and they lose their security clearance. And there's no group of NDE experiencers that I found in general that go through more than a combat soldier when they can't talk about their experience out of fear or ridicule, and they have moral injuries, post-traumatic stress, physical bodily injuries. It just exacerbates it when they can't talk about they can't do a self-report. But in general, I have to just say I am so proud of Mr. Dubois and Heidi and all the individuals who contributed to this symposium. It was participating with a group of people that took these stories. They were unbiased. The whole time there was no judgment. They published the stories of these experiencers as they were given. There was no altering. They gave us a free hand at expressing ourselves as subject experts. And Diane's contribution in education for 50 years and the call that the curriculum be brought to medical schools and to have a standard operating procedure was very important. Doctors understanding they're actually creating the gap by not collecting the self-reports of patients. And this is absolutely 100% preventable if they implement the strategies that were outlined in the commentary the commentary that Diane and I wrote. So Will it be impactful? Absolutely. Why? Because it's noting worldwide with medical professionals and healthcare workers don't create this gap. And when it does happen, this is the way that you can help close it. It rolls all the way out to the family. Why it's beneficial to have this open access? I just experienced that contrast. When John Hopkins released this due to COVID virus, they released it open access. I was able to circulate that information to prominent people, not even just in the medical field, but in psychiatrists, sociologists, ambulance workers, nurses, clergy, and even the general public. Why is that important to have that much open access? You're talking about open access forever, which means researchers, school teachers, they can pick up this symposium and start talking to their students in the classroom. They can start bringing this up in ministry school, medical school. In the absence of the medical professionals, including this in the curriculum, this gap of care will live forever. And if those doctors who are reading this, and it's just subject to the medical professionals who maybe not be interested and they may look sideways about this, you're not going to have the impact. It's just not going to have the impact to put the curriculum in place in medical school and develop a standard operating procedure for medical staff, not only to not create it, but when it is created, to help prevent it.
Right. So this
when
is
you bring it
this...
out when you bring it out to the general public, you're helping me as an experiencer. You're helping someone who loves an experiencer, and it goes very broad, and it'll be forever.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
So that's what we want to see happen with this. It's this ongoing project that is possible if we can raise the money. So Heidi, tell us how people could contribute to make this happen, and then if the money is raised, how the program will be promoted.
Mm-hmm. So individuals who want to donate any amount, $5, $20, whatever you're able to give, they can go to our website, nibjournal.org, click on the support tab, then click on donate, and there you'll be able to select from a drop-down menu what you want your donation to go towards. So for this, you will select healthcare after a near-death experience, and then enter your payment details. Also, if any organizations are interested in sponsoring the issue, we can put their logo, advertise their logo in the issue. If they're interested, they can reach out to me at Narrative Bioethics, that's all one word, Narrative Bioethics @gmail.com, or from the website, you can click on Contact Us and you can reach me that way. So if we're successful, which I really think we will be, we've done this in the past with other issues that we really felt it was important to get them out to the masses. But we'll use the money to, like I said, pay the press's licensing fee first and foremost, and then also, creating that discussion guide, will create curriculum at WashU and push that out to our followers so that they can also use it freely, the curriculum, to teach ethics sessions at their institutions. We have a newsletter that goes out with over 2,000 subscribers. We can push it that way and push it on all of our social media pages. It's really a goal of mine, and I think Lilia, to get this done, and I think we will succeed, but we could sure use your help.
Well, I think this would be tremendous for chaplains too, and for the education process that they go through in order to become certified chaplains in either hospitals, prisons, or the military. It's going to be tremendously valuable in so many ways. I can't be happier than I am about having you guys on the show to talk about this. And we will post those two addresses on our website with the show. So if anyone wants to go in, if they didn't get I'll have you repeat it, Heidi. Actually, why don't you go ahead and do that again?
Sure. So the website is NIB. Sorry. Let me give you my email address first. It's narrativebioethics@gmail.com. And again, the website is nibjournal.org. Click on support, click on donate, and then use the drop-down menu to select that you'd like your donation to go to healthcare after a near-death experience. And again, all contributions are tax deductible. We're a 501c3. So
terrific. May I also offer that if there's anybody that would like more information about closing the medical gap of care, they can contact Lilia Samoilo at NDE-GOC@outlook.com.
Repeat it again, Lilia.
Yes, the email address would be NDE-GOC@outlook.com. And I'd be happy to respond to anybody's interest or request.
Oh, that's terrific. Well, guys, we are out of time for today, but thank you so much to Lilia Samoilo and Heidi Walsh for sharing the story of their project and their goals to inform doctors and nurses of the importance of giving attention and respect to patients who want to tell them about their out-of-body or near-death experiences.
Lee, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your audience.
Well, I think that this will be of great interest because so many of my audience over the years have told me about how they got burned by some rude doctor or some nurse who just blew them off because they didn't want to hear anything about a near-death experience. There are doctors who would just turn around and walk out of the room without saying another word.
Yeah. I would like to say something as well. Anyone listening, you can make a contribution, that will have a lifelong impact on people who have these experiences and actually help shape the progress of helping to close the gap of care. So anything you do to contribute, I'd be very appreciative. And also those who would be listening to this in the future with the NIB arena, please reach out to Lee Witting's IANDS NDE Radio for over 300 self-reports of NDEs.
Thank you, Lilia. Well, to listen to this show again or any of our past shows, as Lilia just said, go to NDE Radio, hit the past shows button. And for those regular listeners, we have some exciting new apps for iPhones and Androids. They're free for the downloading, so that makes it especially easy if you like to go out jogging or you're in your car and you want to listen to a half-hour episode of NDE Radio. So tune in again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for the next episode of NDE Radio. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.